Services Secretary Tom Price was booted out of office in a taxpayer spending and luxury travel scandal. Before all that, Tom Price had a stock scandal that arguably was an even bigger deal. When Tom Price was a congressman from Georgia, he bought tens of thousands of dollars in stock in a company called Innate Immunotherapeutics, and he bought that stock at a discounted rate. It was a big sticking point at his confirmation hearings. He testified that he didn't get a special price on that stock. In fact, he did. He was one of fewer than 20 U.S. investors who were offered that sweet deal. He admitted that he'd first heard about that company from another colleague down the hall. Congressman Chris Collins is a Republican from upstate New York, from Buffalo. He's also one of the largest shareholders in that Australian pharmaceutical company, and he sat on the board of directors of that company, which itself is an unusual thing for a sitting member of Congress, let alone one on a committee that oversees healthcare companies. After Congressman Collins allegedly tried to get his colleagues, like Tom Price, to invest in that company, House ethics investigators started looking into Congressman Chris Collins and his ties to that company last year. Well, today, this long-brewing scandal culminated with Congressman Chris Collins getting arrested on federal insider trading charges and for lying to federal agents. That's him spot-shadowed there in a scrum outside his appearance at federal court in New York City today. Today probably felt like the longest day of Congressman Chris Collins' life. But it also must have felt like a long time coming for the local reporters at Congressman Collins' hometown paper, the Buffalo News, who have frankly been on this story from before the beginning. Jerry Zremski is the Washington bureau chief for Buffalo News. He's the reporter who first broke the story that there was a House ethics investigation into Congressman Collins and his ties to the pharmaceutical company way back before any of it had taken the turn to being an alleged crime. Buffalo News stayed on the story even when the congressman repeatedly publicly attacked them, all up until the congressman's ties to this company resulted in this criminal indictment today. Mr. Zremski, I imagine this has felt like a long time coming. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much.
How did this story evolve from the first stories that Buffalo News ran on this matter to where it ended up today?
Well, it was really a long, long trail that we ended up following. It all started, as you mentioned, with the investigation into Tom Price and his stock trades and how they related to Chris Collins. But really the big break in the story, I think, was one that went largely unnoticed, and it was late in June of last year when all of a sudden on one Wednesday night, Innate Immunotherapeutics introduces this press release saying, hey, we've got this great news from the FDA. We're going to be able to do clinical trials in the U.S. And then a couple of days later, there's this sudden hold on the stock trading. And that seemed very, very suspicious. And then only a couple of days later, the following Monday night, we find out why there was the hold. The clinical trials of their much-touted drug to supposedly cure multiple sclerosis failed completely. So the company's only product was essentially worthless, and so was the company.
And that's an unusual dynamic to have this sort of hyping press release saying things are going great right before things actually cratered.
Exactly. I did a story at the time where I talked to people in Australia involved in the investment industry, and also people in Buffalo, and they both looked at this as what's called a pump and dump scheme, where you tout the price of the stock, and then everything goes quiet for a day or two while the insiders sell, and then the bad news comes out.
So that's so that investors who are in the know, who are selling, will get the best possible price for their stock while they're selling it off, while the rest of the dupes in the public who don't know it are about to take a bath.
Exactly. Okay. Now, one interesting thing, though, is that the indictment doesn't address the first part of that highly touted optimistic press release. That's not in there. But the second part of this long delay and the insiders dumping the stock, yes, that's in there.
Now, one of the other things that's in the indictment, I think, is a reference to you. There's part of what's alleged in the scheme is that Congressman Collins' office released a statement to a reporter, who I think is you, essentially saying that, hey, when my family sold off this stock, as the stock cratered and dropped by 92% in value, you shouldn't see that as essentially giving you a statement exonerating the family of any wrongdoing for having done that, making it seem like they actually got hit very hard, just like members of the public did who might have held this stock. Is that essentially the way that you feature in the indictment? And what did you make of that statement when you actually got it from Collins's office?
Well, that's pretty much the way it was. Is in terms of how it happened, I asked the questions about the family and, the family's investment, what happened with that, did they sell, etc. And I got this very straightforward statement which said there was nothing suspicious here, that everyone had taken a loss, etc. And it clearly turned out not to be true. That statement turned out not to be true. So, of course, when I was reading the indictment this morning, I read that and I said, oh, that sounds like a very familiar little press release, come to think of it.
Congressman Collins has been reportedly overheard near the floor of the House bragging about how many millionaires he made in Buffalo back home by talking people into investing into this company. He's also tried to raise funds politically by attacking the Buffalo News, by attacking you and your paper for having pursued this story. How do you think this will play at home for him? He says he's going to run for re-election.
That's a very, very interesting question. The thing that he really has going for him is that he is representing one of the most Republican districts, probably the most Republican district in New York State. So there is a certain percentage of people in his district who are simply going to believe him, who are going to think this is another an attempt by the press and the evil FBI to go after Republicans again, and will vote on partisan lines. I think discerning voters may think about this a little bit more, but it's really going to be a struggle, I think, for any Democrat to win in that district just because of the partisan lean of the district.
This is one of those speaking indictments, though, that is sort of written, I think, for a public audience. To the extent that it gets circulated and people read this for themselves, it's a pretty powerful case. Jerry Zremski, Washington Bureau Chief for Buffalo News. I know it has not been fun to be the target of the congressman's ire for pursuing this story, back home especially. But congratulations on being out ahead of this. And boy, this turned into a big deal. Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Subscribe to your local paper. I'll be right back.